Please join me in welcoming Asug's Chairman of the Board, Keith Sturgill. Keith, good to see you.
Good to see you, Jeff.
How you doing?
Doing great.
We have these great chairs this year.
Oh, yeah.
And we get to wear blue jeans. We've never done that before.
This is a first.
You know, you and I have spoken on this stage for many years, but we've always spoken separately. And this year, we're going to speak together. A lot has happened over this past year, and we've got a lot of ground to cover this afternoon. So jumping right in, Keith, as the CIO of Eastman, as the leader of this great SAP community, as an expert in the materials sector, I'd like to hear your sense of where you think we are at the moment.
Jeff, I sense things are picking up momentum. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree.
You know, if you think about our recent past, our bread and butter has been about driving productivity, improving the productivity of our organizations year over year. And I believe that's going to continue to be important, but productivity alone, it's not going to take us to where we want to go. You know, I'm really happy that we're starting to think deeper and broader. We're quickly getting to the core of what really matters to our business, what deeply matters to our customers and to our daily operations. All of our businesses make thousands of decisions every day. And that's what really defines whether we're successful or not in the marketplace. If we can dramatically improve the speed and the quality of those decisions, it will be transformational. I don't have any doubt about that. So, you know, I'm starting to think about this as the rise of the decision machine. Mm-hmm. You know, as we reinvent ourselves, as we reinvent our businesses, we're starting to put the decision at the center. We're then defining the processes and then the technology that support the decision. It's no longer the technology in the driver's seat. It's not even the process in the driver's seat. It's the decision.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Jeff, you know, you're a CEO, a former CIO. I'm interested in your perspective on how things have changed.
You know, Keith, as the CEO, I find I'm much more interested, engaged in how Asug is using technology to improve our customer experience. I don't spend as much time thinking about our operational systems, such as finance or production or HR. I honestly just expect those to work. Instead, I think a lot about our customers and how we're using technology to engage with them a lot better. And just like everyone else, I think here in this room and here in Orlando this week, digitizing is absolutely impacting us, both in ways we could predict and in ways we just simply couldn't. And like many of you, I also feel that we are behind. And perhaps, Keith, that is the new normal, a persistent feeling that we're just a few steps behind customer expectations. And I'll tell you that feeling, I think, is a great motivator for us because it keeps us pushing forward. We have to be laser focused on how we use technology to create a better and more direct engagement with our customers. It's this dialogue that is so critically important.
It's all about the customer experience.
Absolutely.
You know, sometimes I think those of us in the B2B industries make the mistake of thinking that customer experience is less important than companies in the retail spaces or the financial services sector. But you know, I believe firmly that consumer-grade expectations are coming to B2B companies faster than most people think. So, you know, I would encourage all of us to target a consumer-grade experience very soon. Jeff, I remember this morning Bill talked about this issue of indirect licensing, and
yep.
I know that's been a big topic for the Asug board. It was a topic yesterday in the executive exchange. That's certainly something that's changed in the last year.
Absolutely, Keith, and we've spent a lot of time, even over the past few days, talking about it. You know, I really would like to have us get this issue addressed quickly with SAP so we can all get back to the really important topics of moving our organizations forward. We've been working very closely with this community as well as with SAP to understand where the challenges are and how we communicate them with everyone and how we build a solution that really works for all of us. And some of the dialogues that we've been in over the past few days, I really believe underscore that. This is not an easy task, but I do believe, and as we've seen from SAP, they're very open to the feedback and they're committed to doing the right thing. And as I think about this issue and as I've watched the press and I've thought about this through the eyes of our member companies, and we've been talking a lot about it over the past few months, at the center of this issue is the fact that the licensing terms that we've all operated under over the past 30 years are just not working in today's digitized world.
True.
So we need to modernize these definitions and make sure that it's a clear and understandable way that we work with SAP. And that's exactly what's happening in the announcements this morning, or I think the first, clear steps in that journey. And I want everyone in the audience to know today that we are working with each and every one of you, but it is so important that we hear your voice and we understand where your thoughts are and how you want to make sure that we represent your needs as we talk about this very broad topic. As Asug, we've already published quite a bit on this, and there's a lot more coming. So we'd like you to have a voice, share your voice as we move forward.
Yeah, so let's put these licensing issues aside for a little bit. This past year, I believe we're starting to see the inevitable shift of digital technology from a very important enabler of all of our businesses to, I would argue, the key differentiator for our businesses, even for companies like mine, materials manufacturers.
Exactly, Keith. Over the past few years, you've used a really great tagline here, beware of the bear.
Yeah, I love the bear. It's all about the danger of protecting the status quo. Jeff, have I ever told you the hold the horses story?
You haven't.
If you guys will indulge me, let me tell a really quick story. I believe all of our organizations are filled with examples of holding the horses. Back in World War I, the primary strategy for winning battles was you would line up your cannons on the battlefield and then fire those cannons faster than your enemy. The rate of fire was determined to be the primary differentiator for victory. So they hired experts to assess the moves of every soldier to understand, are there ways that they can improve the rate of fire? So they actually filmed the soldiers. They assessed their every move. And as you would guess, they found ways that they could improve the rate of fire. But there was this one set of actions that the experts just couldn't understand. It was repeated every time, so they thought it had to be important, but it didn't make any sense to them. The motion was something like this. You had one soldier who would pick up an artillery shell, walk it over, hand it to the soldier responsible for loading and firing the cannon, and then immediately take exactly 7 steps backwards, come to attention just like this, and as soon as he did this, the cannon would fire. The experts were confused by this, but it happened every single time by every soldier at every cannon. They didn't know the purpose. So eventually they just asked the generals, and the generals immediately knew. They said, oh, they're holding the horses. To which the expert said, there are no horses.
Yeah.
As it turns out, when this procedure was developed, horses were used to pull the cannons onto the battlefield. So, how many examples of things in your organization can you find that were important once, but are no longer necessary? How many examples of corporate holding the horses can you find? So let's take the reins. Let's be the thought leaders.
This is your time, Keith.
It's all of our time, Jeff. It was Ronald Reagan who said, status quo is Latin for the mess we're in. So let's shift our conversation a little bit. Let's talk about what all of us, each of us, as part of this important user community, as part of Asug, what do we need to do now? What steps do we need to take to prepare for the future?
Great question, Keith. You first.
I ask you.
You did, okay. So I recall a conversation that you and I have had a number of times about technology teams. And in that conversation, you've made some very provocative statements to me. And what you've said is that technology professionals should ultimately be part of the business, not part of IT. And you weren't advocating, as you and I were chatting through that, getting rid of the technology organization, but instead you were rather making the point that technology is a means to an end rather than an end in and of itself. And I think, Keith, that this is a really important point. Technology is supposed to be a tool that helps our organizations, as you well know, to operate better, to connect better with our customers, and ultimately to sell better products. So my first recommendation, Keith, is to start acting as one coordinated business.
Great.
My second recommendation is to do something really hard. Carve out time to focus on innovation. And this morning in the keynotes, we talked about innovation and we talked about software that can help us innovate. But in order to get to those innovations, the first thing you need is time. And I think that in today's world of instant communication and expecting fast turnaround, how do you really focus on addressing the needs of today, next quarter, or even next year when you can't get out from underneath the oppressive needs of right now? I think it takes a lot of personal strength and energy to shut down the white noise that exists around each of us and instead concentrate on where our businesses could be going.
Yeah, and it's easy to say, but hard to do. I think it's important that we find time, we make it a priority, we carve out the time. It's really part of being a professional.
Keith, we all talk about innovation, but we so rarely actually pull it off. And to be fair, I don't think the blame for stagnant innovation falls just on us as overwhelmed professionals. The organizational culture, the culture of our organizations, also needs to be held accountable. Keith, I'm interested in what are your thoughts on what an innovative culture looks like?
You know, culture is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about these days. You know, I could talk about this for hours, and I know you don't want me to do that. But I think
they do, but let's keep going.
There are three things that I think that we need to amp up in our cultures right now. The first thing that I would say is we need to amp up our bias for action. We need to be willing and, of course, able to make good decisions despite uncertainty and despite risk. We've got to be willing to accept clarity over certainty and not get bogged down in paralysis analysis. Secondly, I think we've got to be persistent and adaptable as brand new opportunities appear, probably unexpected opportunities. And third, and I think this is absolutely the most important, we've got to demonstrate courageous leadership. Great opportunities always come with great challenges. But you know, I think it's our time to be a thought leader, to help our organizations evolve and transform. And this is always going to involve personal risk. And you know what? I personally find that exciting.
I do too, Keith, right? I think that courageous leadership means that you don't wait for culture to evolve around you. You actually are responsible for empowering that particular culture, of making sure that culture doesn't become for you a spectator sport. We can't sit in the bleachers and let others define it for us. It requires us to be the initiators. And I think in today's world of hyper-technological change and a continued convergence in everything being mobile and everything being digital, we have a great opportunity as technology leaders to drive that culture. Because I think, as Peter Drucker has said, results are gained by opportunities that we exploit versus not solving problems. So Keith, let's talk about simplicity versus complexity. This is a subject I've been thinking a lot about. And I know we all say that technology is making our lives simpler, but we're achieving this, quite frankly, by writing lots and lots more lines of code. It seems to me the path to simple is, in fact, a slog through a far more intricate and complex digital world that, as technology professionals, honestly, is continuing to test our patience and sanity.
I would call this more our journey to sophistication. At one point I had a quote in my office that said something like this: why make something simple when you can make it wonderfully complex? Now,
absolutely.
I meant it as a joke, of course, but many times it just hit a little bit too close to home. So let me give you kind of an example of what I mean. When we envision a brand new service, it almost always starts as a simple block diagram. Simplistic. Let's call it the manager view. It looks simple, on the surface at least. It's probably naive because alone it won't work. It can't get the job done. At this point, it's simply a simple idea. Then we go to work on it, and we create this amazingly complex process that does get the job done. It works. But you know what? Often we stop because what works, works. And we have 1,000 other things to do. What I think we've got to start doing is push through the complexity to get to really sophisticated, elegant solutions that are simple to use, yet highly functional.
Keith, you and I share a passion for cars.
Yeah, we do. I think it's more of a disease, actually.
It is.
You never forget your first car.
You never forget your first car, Keith. What was yours?
I had a 1974 Chevrolet Camaro. Really cool.
You know, my first car, like many of us here, Keith, was a hand-me-down from my parents. And by the time it got to me, it literally was a piece of junk. They gave me a convertible, which sounds really cool, but when it rained outside, it pretty much rained inside it as well. And it didn't like starting most mornings when I was trying to get to school.
Yeah. So did it have trouble starting, or did you?
Well, you know, there's just some truth to that, Keith. Probably we both did. But anyway, you know, luckily for me, it was a manual transmission. And we lived at the top of a hill. So my solution was to grab my brother, and together we'd push the car out of the driveway, send it down the hill, pop the clutch, and get it to start. It was not the safest way to get to school, but we got there and we got the job done. And mechanically, you know, when you think back, this car was a pretty simple machine. You know, it didn't have many electronics, and you could tinker it within your garage with a few simple tools. And when I compare that now to the Audi that's in my garage today, it has almost nothing in common, and it looks like it's from an episode of The Jetsons. They both get me to the same destination, but the experience couldn't be more different. My Audi is an electronic marvel, Keith. It's connected to the internet. My iPhone is integrated into it. The cruise control, right, in these new cars allows you to speed up and slow down based on the cars behind you. And the instrumentation panel is all LCD and electronic driven. It is definitely a sophisticated vehicle, but I want to think for a moment, is it really simpler? It's automated enough that the odds of me getting into an accident are less, and I think it's safer for my teenage son to drive, but I can tell you it took me a week to configure the thing when I got it home, and that by itself was a frustrating experience, kind of like implementing an ERP these days. So, you know, everything's fine until my son drives it, and then I freak out because he's changed something. I can't figure out what button to press to get it back to the way I want to drive. And at the end of the day, can I fix this thing in my garage? Not a chance. There's not a chance. So the car, to your point, it's sophisticated, but it's not simple. Simple would be for me to get in the car and just have it take me to my destination, which I think that we've been at transportation for well over 100 years, and we're still on this journey to ultimate sophistication, which to me is just take me where I want to go.
Yeah, but it's really cool. You have to.
Oh, it's absolutely cool.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing experience.
Yeah, so these are really interesting times. Since we're talking about cars, I love this quote from Mario Andretti. If everything seems under control, you're simply not going fast enough. Speed and change, certainly our friends. So we're running short on time here, so let's shift our conversation. Sure. What do you think about the future?
You know, that's a great question, Keith. So a quote comes to mind. The noted science fiction writer William Gibson said, "The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed." As a community, and as one of the largest SAP communities on this planet, and arguably the largest technology community, we need to do more, I believe, to help each other understand and succeed in these fast-changing and digitizing world that we live in. And I do believe, as we said this morning, as we lead this out, this is our time. And our time is going to require us to be courageous, to take risks, and to rely on each other and bring the support of our collective community together so we avoid this feeling of being isolated along this journey. We accomplish this, Keith, I think, by sharing our successes and challenges. I encourage everyone to get engaged with your local Asug chapter or special interest groups. And this is what Asug is here for, Keith, and why you and 13 of your other, CIOs and technology professionals spend time thinking about this community, because it's what we've been doing together for the past 26 years. Sharing stories are the catalyst for growth and inspiration. And it is this impetus which will ensure that this really is your time.
So we've talked about some really great things, some great trends. We're at an inflection point, I believe.
Absolutely.
All of these things take time. How do we possibly find the time to do all of this stuff? So if you'll indulge me, I've got one last story I want to tell you.
I love your stories.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So one of my favorite TED Talks is by a gentleman by the name of Hans Rosling, who actually passed away in February of this year. He has a talk he calls The Magic Washing Machine. And it goes something like this. When Hans was a small boy, I think 4 years old or so, he remembered his mother every day would spend tremendous amount of time carrying water and then heating that water and then using that to wash the family's clothes. The work was hard, It was time consuming. It was unrelenting, and it took many hours every day. Then one day, the family got a brand new automatic washing machine. The machine was installed. Hans' mother put the clothes in the machine. She put in the detergent. And Hans' grandmother, who was still living in the home, was so excited because she had spent a lifetime manually washing the clothes that she said, "Can I start the button? Can I push the button?" So she started the machine, and the whole family gathered around, and they watched the machine wash the clothes. Now, the fact that they had a machine that would wash the clothes wasn't what created the magic. What created the magic was what it gave Hans' mother. You see, it gave her the most valuable asset of all. It gave her time. And then she used that time to take young Hans to the library, to read to him, to instill in him a love of books and a love of learning. Hans would say it changed his family tree. Hans went on to university and he became a physician, a noted statistician, and a well-known public speaker. So, guys, I believe that most of our organizations are still washing our data by hand. Imagine the magic that we can unleash when we create the machine to wash the data.
I think that's absolutely wonderful, Keith, certainly.
You know I like a good story.
You always do.
Yeah. So as chairman of this great community, I certainly want to hear your stories. I want you to share them, the good ones, the bad ones, and even the ugly ones. All of us, including me, like to tell our success stories. And I think that's great, but many times I would argue I think we learn more from sharing our mistakes. The times when we were courageous, we stepped out on the limb, and things just didn't work out the way we had hoped. We're going to make some mistakes on this journey. Problems will occur along the way. And you know, it's really easy to be a problem spotter. Every strategy has problems. Great organizations and certainly great people are problem solvers, not simply problem spotters. So let's learn. Let's share our losses as well as our wins.
I think that's great, Keith. You know, technology should be used as a means to better connect with our customers. This is where we code from here. So my promise to everyone here in the audience today and everyone who's online is to share your stories with us. Share them so you can help others move forward. And this is really why I believe that this community is so powerful and why we are such a unique differentiator in the whole SAP ecosystem. We're here for each other. We benefit from each other's success. And this is what energizes me. When I get into a chapter meeting or we go to an event together along with the board and the 400 volunteers we have, hearing these stories is extremely powerful. And we're here for each other, Keith, and ultimately we benefit from each other's success. This really is our time.
Yeah, Jeff, this is our time for sure. It's a brand new day.
It's a brand new day. Keith, always, thank you so much for your leadership of our community. Ladies and gentlemen, Keith Sturgill.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.